Good morning, everybody. Good morning to President-elect. Thank you so much for those gracious words of introduction, to the Board of Trustees, to the faculty, parents, family, friends, and most of all, the class of 2007. Congratulations. Congratulations on your graduation, and thank you for allowing me the honor of being a part of it. I also want to echo the President's remarks. I am glad that Okendo is not running for this particular seat yet. And I want to thank David for his outstanding words and his moving testimony. We're very grateful to him. We give him all the time. I also want to thank Southern New Hampshire University for this honorary Doctor of Laws degree. You know, I ended up paying for my first law degree for years and years. So for all of you with visions of law school, I would consider running for president. And then waiting for a commencement invite instead, because it is much cheaper to get your degree this way. You know, there is a verse from the Bible that is sometimes read or recited during rites of passage like this. Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11 says as follows. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I felt as a child. I thought as a child. Now that I have become a man, I have put away childish things. I bring this up because there's often an assumption on days like today that growing up is purely a function of age. And becoming an adult is an inevitable progression that can be measured by a series of milestones. College graduation, or your first job, or the first time you throw a party where you also serve food. And yet, maturity does not come from any one occasion. It emerges as a quality of character. Because the fact is, I know a whole lot of 30 and 40 and 50-year-olds who have not yet put away childish things, who continually struggle to rise above the selfish, or the petty, or the small. We see this reflected in our country today. We see it in our politics. Politics that become more concerned about who's up and who's down and who's working to solve the real challenges facing the next generation. Politics where debates over war and peace are reduced to 60-second sound bites and 30-second attack ads. We see it in the media culture that sensationalizes the trivial and trivializes the profound. In a 24-hour news network bonanza that never fails to keep us posted on how many days Paris Hilton will spend in jail, but often fails to update us on the continuing genocide in Darfur, or the recovery effort in New Orleans, or the poverty that plagues too many American streets. And as we're fed this steady diet of cynicism, it's easy to start buying into it and put off hard decisions. We become tempted to turn inward, suspicious that change is really possible, doubtful that one person can really make a difference. That's where the true test of growing up occurs. That's where all of you, the class of 2007, come in. No matter where you go from here, whether it's in the public service or the business world, whether it's law school or medical school, whether you become scientists or artists or entertainers, you will face a choice. Do you want to be a passive observer of the world, of the way the world is? Or do you want to be an active citizen in shaping the way that the world ought to be? in both your own life and the life of your country, will you strive to put away childish things? It's a constant struggle, this quest for maturity, and as my wife will tell you, I haven't always been on the winning side of that battle in my own life. There have been times where I haven't put aside childish things, but through my own tests and failings, I've learned a few lessons here and there about growing up. And there's three things I'd like to leave with you today. Three lessons that I think may be relevant in the next aspect of your journey. The first lesson came during my first year in college. Back then, I had a tendency, I must confess, in my mother's words, to act a bit casual about my future. I rebelled, angry in the way that many young men can sometimes get angry in the way that many young African-American men in particular can get angry, thinking that responsibility and hard work were old-fashioned conventions that didn't apply to me. I partied a little too much, studied just enough to get by. I know none of you suffer from the same malady, except for that guy who yelled out. And once, after a particularly long night, where we had spilled a little too much beer, and broken a few too many bottles, and trashed a little too much of the dorm, the next day the mess was so bad that one of the cleaning ladies at the dorm walked in and saw it, and she began to tear up. And when a girlfriend of mine heard about this, she said to me something that I'll never forget. She said, "That woman could have been my grandmother, Barack. She spent her days cleaning up after somebody else's mess." Which drove home for me the first lesson of growing up, that the world doesn't just revolve around you. There's a lot of talk in this country about the federal deficit, but I think we should talk more about our empathy deficit. The ability to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, to see the world through those who are different from us. The child who's hungry, the laid-off steel worker, the immigrant woman who's cleaning your dorm room. As you go on in life, cultivating this quality of empathy will become harder, not easy, because it turns out there's no community service requirement in the real world, no one forcing you to care. You'll be free to live in neighborhoods with people who are exactly like yourself. Send your kids to the same schools and narrow your concerns to what's going on in your own little circle. Not only that, we live in a culture that discourages empathy, a culture that tells us all too often that our principal goal in life should be to be rich, thin, young, famous, safe, and entertaining. A culture where those in power too often encourage these selfish impulses. They'll tell you that the Americans who sleep in the streets and beg for food got there because they're all lazy or weak of spirit. That the inner city children who are trapped in dilapidated schools can't learn and won't learn, and so we should just give up on them entirely. That the innocent people being slaughtered and expelled from their homes halfway around the world where somebody else's problem to take care of. I hope you don't listen to this. I hope you choose to broaden and not contract your ambit of concern. Not because you have an obligation to those who are less fortunate, although I think you do have that obligation. Not because you have a debt to all those who helped you get to where you are today, although you do have that debt. It's because you have an obligation to yourselves. Because our individual salvation always depends on collective salvation. Because it's only when you hitch your wagon to something larger than yourself that you realize your true potential and start becoming full grown. The second lesson I learned after college, when I had this crazy idea that I wanted to be a community organizer and work in low-income neighborhoods. Now, nobody knew exactly what that meant. My mother and grandparents thought I should go to law school. My friends had applied for jobs on Wall Street. But I went ahead and wrote letters to every organization in the country that I could think of that I thought was doing work at a grassroots level. And finally, the small group of churches on the south side of Chicago wrote back and gave me a job organizing neighborhoods devastated by steel plant closings in the early 80s. The churches didn't have much money, so they offered me the grand sum of $12,000 a year plus $1,000 to buy a car. It wasn't a very good car. And I drove it all the way to Chicago from New York City, a place, Chicago, I had never been and where I didn't know a living soul. And even people who didn't know me were skeptical about my decision. I remember having a conversation with an older man I met before I arrived in Chicago. I told him about my plans to be a community organizer, and he looked at me and said, "What the heck is that?" He said, "Let me tell you something. You look like a nice, clean-cut young man. You've got a nice voice. So let me give you a piece of advice. Forget this community organizing business. You can't change the world, and people won't appreciate you trying. What you should do is go into television broadcasting. I'm telling you, you've got a future there." And I could have taken his advice. I could have taken my mother's advice. I could have taken my grandparents' advice. I could have taken the path that my friends were traveling at the time. Objectively speaking, that older man might have had a point about the TV thing. But I knew there was something in me that wanted to try for something bigger. So the second lesson in growing up, I think, is this. Challenge yourself. Take some risks in your life. This isn't always easy. In a few minutes, all of you, class of 2007, can take your diploma, walk off the stage, and go chasing after the big house and the large salary and the nice suits and the other things that our money culture says you should buy. But I hope that's not your only focus. Focusing your life solely on making a buck shows a poverty of ambition. It asks too little of yourself, and ultimately it may leave you unfulfilled. Don't let people talk to you into doing just what's easy or what's comfortable. Listen to what's inside of you and decide what it is that you care about so much that you're willing to risk it all. The third lesson is one that I got once I got to Chicago. I'd spent weeks organizing our very first community meeting in this low-income neighborhood that was plagued by gang violence. And so I worked with lay leadership in the community, and we invited police. We made phone calls, we went to churches and passed out flyers. I'd been warned of the turf battles and the bad politics between certain community leaders, but I ignored them. I was confident that I knew what I was doing. And so the night of the first community meeting that I'd organized, we arranged rows and rows of chairs in anticipation of the crowds. And we waited. And we waited. And finally, a group of older people walked into the hall. And they sat down, and this little old lady raises her hand and asks, "Is this where the bingo game is?" 13 people showed up that night. The police never came. And the meeting was a complete disaster. And later, the volunteers from the churches that I was working with told me that they were going to give up on trying to make our community a better place, that they'd been doing this for 2 years before I had arrived. They had nothing to show for it. They were tired, they said. And I was tired too. But at that point, as I was speaking to them, I looked outside and I saw some young boys playing in a vacant lot across the street. And they were tossing stones that had boarded up an apartment building, a building that already had broken glass all around it. And I turned to the lay people that I was working with and I asked them, "Before you quit, I want to answer one question. What's going to happen to those boys out on that street? Who will fight for them if not us? Who will give them a fair shot if we leave?" And at that moment, we were all reminded of the third lesson of growing up, and that is to persevere. Persevere in the way Okendo described, persevere in the way that David has persevered. Making your mark on the world is hard. If it were easy, everybody would do it. But it's not. It takes patience, it takes commitment, and it comes with plenty of failure along the way. The real test is not whether you avoid this failure, because you won't. It's whether you let it harden or shame you into inaction, or whether you learn from it, whether you choose to persevere. After my little speech that night, after that meeting where nobody came, one by one, the volunteers decided not to quit. And we went back to those neighborhoods, and we kept at it, sustaining ourselves with small victories. Maybe a lot got cleaned up, or a job training program got set up, or we were able to set up some mentoring programs for kids that needed it. And eventually, over time, our community changed. And in the process, we changed too. Cultivating empathy, challenging yourself, persevering in the face of adversity. These are qualities that dare us to put away childish things. They're qualities that help us grow up. They're qualities that one graduate today knows especially well. I had a chance to meet a young man today named Richard Comey, who was born thousands of miles from here in southern Nigeria. He'd probably still be there today if he hadn't been forced to flee when his tribe came under attack. Eventually he made it to the United States, worked his way through factories and retail jobs, came here to Southern New Hampshire University to complete the education that he had begun in Africa. And now, with a wife and kids and lots of responsibility, he even is taking the time to give back to his new country by volunteering on a particular presidential candidate's campaign. Richard Comey may be graduating today, but it's clear that he grew up a long time ago. Just as it's clear that David grew up a long time ago, and Kennedy grew up a long time ago. We celebrate with them because their journey is a testament to the powerful idea that in the face of impossible odds, ordinary people can do extraordinary things. At a time when America finds itself at a crossroads, facing challenges we haven't seen in decades, we need to hold on to this idea more than ever. So much is riding on the decisions that are made and the leadership that is provided by you, class of 2007. We're counting on you to help fix a healthcare system that's leaving too many Americans sick or bankrupt or both. We're counting on you to bring back a planet from the brink of a global climate change crisis. We're counting on you to help stop a genocide at Darfur that's taking the lives of innocents as we speak here today. We're counting on you to restore the image of America around the world so that all of us can be proud of our values and our ideals. An America that led so many, like Richard Comey, to find liberty and opportunity and hope on our doorstep. There's some who are betting against you, who say that you don't pay attention to what's going on, that you don't show up to vote, that you're too concerned with your own lives and your own problems to get engaged. That is not what I believe. That's not what I've seen. Instead, I've seen rallies filled with crowds that stretch far into the horizon. Thousands upon thousands signing up to organize online. Scores who are coming to their very first political event of their lifetime. People who in their own neighborhoods are getting involved. Everything from green technologies to soup kitchens to homeless shelters. Just a few hours before this commencement, I got an opportunity to send off hundreds of people who've chosen to take time out of a busy schedule and spend an entire Saturday knocking on doors here in New Hampshire because they're not content to sit back and watch anymore, because they believe they can help this country grow. And whenever the doubt creeps in, and I find myself wondering, if change is really possible, I end up thinking about the young Americans, teenagers and college kids, not much older than you, class of 2007, who a long time ago watched the civil rights movement unfold before them on television sets all across the country. I imagine they would have seen the marches, heard the speeches, but they also probably saw the dogs and the fire hoses and the billy clubs, or the footage of innocent people being beaten within an inch of their lives, or heard the news the day those 4 little girls died when someone threw a bomb into their church. Instinctively, they knew that it would be safer, it would be smarter to stay home, to watch the movement from afar. But they also understood that these people in Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi were their brothers and sisters, that what was happening was wrong, and that they had an obligation to make it right. And when the buses pulled up for a freedom ride down south, they got on. They took risks, and they changed the world. And now, class of 2007, it is your turn. You will be tested by the challenges of this new century, and at times you will fail. But know that you have it within your power to try. The generations who have come before you faced these same fears and uncertainties in their own time. And that if we're willing to shoulder each other's burdens, to take great risks, and to persevere through trial, America will continue its journey towards that distant horizon and a better day. Thank you, class of 2007. Congratulations on your graduation. God bless.